My husband smirked as the security dog strained against its heavy leash, lunging toward our luggage. It was a subtle, arrogant twitch at the corner of his mouth, the kind of micro-expression you only catch if you have spent 6 years studying every contour of a man's face. He thought I was about to spend the rest of my life rotting in a high-security foreign prison. He thought he had executed the perfect crime, framing me for international smuggling, while he walked away with his glamorous young public relations director and millions of dollars in stolen corporate funds. What he did not know was that I had already breached his flawless plan, and I had quietly rewritten his entire future. My name is Elena, and I am 32 years old. Today I stood in the priority security line at John F. Kennedy International Airport, holding an iced matcha latte, just waiting for the steel trap to snap shut. If you have ever had to outsmart a toxic manipulator who thought you were just a naive, compliant partner, leave a comment below with your city. Hit the like button and subscribe, because you will absolutely not want to miss this execution. The morning air inside the international terminal was thick with the scent of expensive roasted coffee and frantic, nervous anticipation. The harsh fluorescent lights overhead buzzed with a low clinical hum that perfectly matched the rapid beating of my heart. I took a slow, deliberate sip from my cup, letting the icy green liquid ground me in reality. We were supposed to be heading to Singapore. It was billed as a lavish luxury vacation to save our failing marriage. Marcus, my 36-year-old husband and the chief operating officer at a major robotics firm, had booked first-class suites. He told me we needed time away to disconnect from the world and remember why we fell in love. But Marcus did not want to reconnect. Marcus wanted me to completely disappear. Standing right behind us in the security queue was Chloe. She was 27 years old, wore a cloud of overpowering designer perfume, and held the official title of lead public relations director for Marcus's firm. Unofficially, she was the woman he was sleeping with. Marcus had insisted she take the exact same flight out of New York, claiming she had to handle an urgent advance press junket in Tokyo and needed to connect through Singapore. It was a completely absurd excuse, an arrangement so flimsy and insulting that any self-respecting wife would have caused an absolute scene. But I had stopped acting like a normal wife 4 months ago. I was acting like a senior cybersecurity architect. I analyzed data packets, I traced encrypted assets, and I observed human behavior without letting a single emotion cloud my judgment. Marcus was sweating. Despite the aggressive air-conditioned chill of the terminal, a fine sheen of moisture coated his forehead. He kept checking his heavy gold watch, shifting his weight from one custom leather loafer to the other. His eyes darted nervously between my sleek silver hard-shell suitcase on the conveyor belt and the stern faces of the federal agents ahead of us. "Go ahead, sweetheart," Marcus urged, his hand resting heavily on the small of my back. He pushed me slightly forward toward the millimeter wave scanner. "Put your bag on the belt and let us get through this so we can relax in the lounge." His touch made my skin crawl, but I offered him a bright, completely oblivious smile. "Of course, darling." I lifted my heavy silver suitcase and placed it squarely onto the metal rollers of the X-ray machine. Right next to my bag sat Chloe's luggage. It was a pristine Gucci canvas duffel bag, screaming of money she absolutely did not earn on a public relations salary. Chloe stood there aggressively, chewing a piece of mint gum, looking profoundly bored and deeply annoyed that she had to endure the screening process with the general public, even in the first-class lane. As my bag rolled forward, the atmosphere at the checkpoint suddenly shifted. A Customs and Border Protection officer walked into our lane, leading a massive Belgian Malinois. The dog was intensely alert, its nose twitching rapidly, as it worked its way down the line of passengers and their carry-on items. Marcus practically vibrated with excitement. He tried to mask it with a look of mild executive irritation, but I saw the pure adrenaline pumping through his neck. I knew exactly what he was waiting for. Last night, while he thought I was trapped in a deep sleep, I had watched him slice open the internal lining of my checked luggage. I had watched him carefully wedge a vacuum-sealed plastic package, wrapped tightly in silver duct tape, deep into the structural framework of my bag. He had packed enough pure synthetic narcotics into my suitcase to ensure I would be locked away in a foreign concrete cell for the rest of my natural life. It was a brilliant, ruthless strategy. With me rotting in an overseas prison, he could easily file for divorce, seize all our marital assets, cash out the massive life insurance policies under the guise of legal hardship, and vanish with Chloe. He would play the role of the devastated, betrayed husband whose wife turned out to be a secret international criminal. But Marcus made one fatal miscalculation. He forgot that I make a living hacking into systems that people believe are impenetrable. I stepped through the scanner. The machine remained completely silent. No red lights, no beeping alarms. I walked to the other side and turned back to watch the show. The conveyor belt hummed loudly as my silver suitcase emerged from the dark X-ray tunnel. The agent staring at the monitor did not even blink. He let my bag roll straight down the metal rollers toward the collection area. I reached out, grabbed the handle of my bag and pulled it off the belt. I looked up and met Marcus's eyes. The color instantly completely drained from his face. His confident, expectant smirk vanished, replaced by an expression of pure, unadulterated confusion. He stared at my suitcase as if it had magically transformed into an apparition. He looked at the glowing monitor, then back at me, his mouth opening slightly in shock. He knew the package he had planted was massive. There was absolutely no way it could have passed through an airport security scanner without lighting up the screens and triggering a massive tactical lockdown. Marcus swallowed hard. His eyes darted frantically around the security area, searching for the trap he had so carefully laid. That was when the Belgian Malinois snapped to attention. The dog bypassed me entirely. It trotted straight past Marcus, ignoring his expensive leather briefcase. Instead, the dog lunged toward the conveyor belt, its nose pressing aggressively against the expensive canvas of Chloe's Gucci duffel bag. The dog let out a sharp, commanding bark and sat down firmly right next to her luggage. Chloe stopped chewing her gum. Her perfectly sculpted eyebrows drew together in deep annoyance. "Excuse me," she snapped at the canine handler. "Get your dog away from my bag. It sheds, and this is limited edition designer." The handler did not apologize. He immediately signaled to the other officers in the lane. "We have a positive alert," he announced loudly. Suddenly, the mundane hum of the airport security line completely shattered. 3 armed officers materialized out of nowhere, entirely surrounding the conveyor belt. A supervisor with a stern, weathered face stepped forward, pointing a gloved hand directly at Chloe. "Ma'am, step away from the luggage and keep your hands where we can clearly see them." Chloe let out an exaggerated theatrical sigh, clearly believing this was just a ridiculous bureaucratic misunderstanding. "You have got to be kidding me. Do you have any idea who I work for?" "Marcus, tell them this is a massive mistake." She turned to Marcus for backup, but Marcus was no longer functioning as a confident tech executive. He looked like a man who had just stepped off a cliff. His breathing was shallow and incredibly rapid. He stared at Chloe's designer bag with wide, terrified eyes, his brain finally putting the horrifying pieces together. I stood 10 feet away, leaning casually against a metal pillar. I took another slow sip of my iced matcha. The drink was perfectly sweet, contrasting beautifully with the bitter panic flooding the space between my husband and his mistress. "Ma'am," the supervisor said, his voice dropping an octave as he pulled Chloe's bag to a heavy metal inspection table. "Are you traveling alone today? Did you pack this bag yourself?" "Yes, I packed it myself," Chloe said, her voice rising with sheer entitlement. "And I demand that you be careful with my belongings." The officer unzipped the main compartment. He did not bother looking at her folded silk dresses or her expensive cosmetics. He ran his hands directly along the bottom frame of the duffel. I watched his fingers trace the internal lining, pressing against the rigid structure. He found the slight irregularity in the fabric. With a swift practice motion, he pulled out a small utility knife and sliced the lining open. Marcus let out a choked, breathless sound. He took a half step backward, his instinct to flee violently battling with his sheer paralysis. The officer reached deep into the hidden cavity of the bag. When he pulled his hand out, he was holding a heavy brick-sized package wrapped entirely in silver duct tape. Chloe's face went completely slack. The entitled irritation vanished from her features, replaced by a pale, trembling horror. She stared at the silver package as if it were a live explosive. "What is that?" she whispered, her voice trembling violently. "I do not know what that is." "That is absolutely not mine." The officer did not answer her pleas. He used his knife to cut a small slit in the tape, revealing the tightly packed vacuum-sealed bags of white powder inside. He wiped a small testing swab against the substance and placed it into a portable chemical analyzer. 5 seconds later, the liquid in the vial turned a bright, undeniable blue. "Positive for heavy synthetic narcotics," the officer stated coldly. Chloe began to scream. It was a high-pitched, hysterical sound that echoed off the high ceilings of the international terminal. "No, someone put that there. Marcus, help me. Tell them I do not know anything about this." Marcus could not help her. Marcus could barely force air into his own lungs. He stared at the package of drugs he had personally purchased and planted in the middle of the night. He looked away from Chloe and slowly turned his head to look directly at me. I did not break eye contact. I did not look scared, and I did not look surprised. I just offered him a very small, very cold smile. In that exact moment, Marcus finally understood. He realized that his naive, obedient wife had found his secret stash while he slept. He realized that while he was busy dreaming of his new billionaire life, I had sliced open Chloe's bag and relocated his deadly cargo. Marcus opened his mouth to speak, but before he could form a single syllable, a heavy hand clamped down on his tailored shoulder. A deep, booming voice cut through Chloe's hysterical screaming. "Well, now," a voice said, "looks like we have a major international problem here." Marcus spun around, coming face to face with the tactical team that had just marched into the security zone. Leading the squad was a tall, imposing officer in a crisp uniform. The gold captain bars gleamed brightly on his collar. It was Carter, my older cousin, a senior captain in the federal agency, and the absolute last person Marcus ever wanted to see standing between him and the airport exit. How did my husband, a respected robotics executive, end up sweating under the unforgiving fluorescent lights of Terminal 4, while my cousin prepared to read him his rights? To completely understand the poetry of this exact moment, we have to rewind exactly 4 months. That was when the man I loved died, and the monster wearing his face finally let his mask slip. It started on a freezing rainy Tuesday in November. Our marriage had been running incredibly cold for a year, filled with unspoken tension, and Marcus constantly claiming he was working late at the tech campus. I was sitting at our kitchen island, reviewing our joint network logs. As a cybersecurity architect, data patterns speak to me far louder than words ever could. I had noticed minor anomalies. Strange encrypted traffic originating from his home office late at night. Unexplained location pings when he claimed he was eating stale sandwiches in the boardroom. When I confronted him that night, the air in the room instantly turned to ice. He did not yell or act defensive. He did something much worse. He walked over, placed his hands heavily on my shoulders, and looked at me with deep, manufactured pity. "Your mind is playing tricks on you, Elena," he whispered, his voice dripping with condescension. "You have been so stressed with your intense security audits lately. You are imagining threats where there are none. That phrase, 'your mind is playing tricks on you,' he deployed it constantly over the next few weeks. If I asked about a strange perfume scent on his jacket, my mind was playing tricks on me. If I questioned why he changed his biometric passcodes, my mind was playing tricks on me. The psychological pain was a slow, suffocating weight. I spent nights staring at the ceiling, wondering if my mind was actually fracturing under the pressure of my career. He isolated me, making me feel entirely dependent on his fabricated version of reality. He wanted me weak, doubtful, and completely blind. But he forgot one crucial detail about what I do for a living. I tear apart malicious code and expose hidden digital threats for breakfast. I do not stay blind for long. Instead of breaking down, I woke up. I stopped asking him questions, and I started asking the network data. While Marcus slept soundly beside me, believing he had successfully crushed my spirit, I took my encrypted laptop into the guest room and went to work. I did not cry. I hacked. I bypassed the superficial joint accounts and dug directly into his personal devices, cross-referencing public records and hidden shell servers I suspected he might use. The data packets painted a vivid, undeniable picture of absolute betrayal. I found receipts for a luxury penthouse in Manhattan charging $20,000 a month. I found flight manifests for weekend getaways on private chartered jets to Aspen. And weaving through this trail of financial breadcrumbs was one recurring name: Chloe, his 27-year-old public relations director, the girl who always smiled too widely at company holiday parties. The pain of the infidelity was a sharp knife to the chest, but the financial irregularities I uncovered next were a nuclear bomb waiting to detonate. I realized Marcus was not just cheating on me. He was siphoning massive amounts of capital from his robotics firm. The lavish gifts for Chloe were a mere fraction of the missing funds. He was embezzling millions. Knowing this, I did what any rational woman trained in digital warfare would do. I smiled. I cooked his favorite meals. I kissed his cheek when he left for work. I became the perfect, oblivious wife, while I silently built an ironclad digital dossier against him. Then came the trap. 2 weeks ago, Marcus walked through our front door holding a glossy travel brochure. He had a wide, boyish grin on his face, the kind he used when we first started dating. He announced he had booked us first-class suites to Singapore, a romantic, luxurious getaway just for the two of us. He held my hands and delivered a heartfelt speech about how much he loved me and how he wanted to make things right. I almost bought the stellar performance until he dropped the caveat. He casually mentioned that Chloe would be flying out on the exact same flight with us. According to Marcus, she urgently needed to handle an advanced press junket in Tokyo, and it was cheaper for the company to route her through Singapore. It was the most absurd, flimsy excuse I had ever heard. Bringing your mistress on a flight meant to save your marriage was not just cruel, it was highly calculated. My internal alarms blared. I knew Marcus. He was deeply arrogant, but he was not stupid enough to risk an awkward confrontation at 30,000 feet just to keep his girlfriend close. He wanted her there for a specific reason. This was not a vacation. It was a setup. He was planning something massive, something that required me to be far away from American soil. And he needed Chloe as his accomplice. Every time he kissed my forehead and told me how excited he was for our trip, that haunting phrase echoed in my mind. Your mind is playing tricks on you, Elena. I packed my bags with deliberate care, playing the role of the eager, clueless wife perfectly. I knew I was walking into a trap, but I also knew I held the ultimate advantage. He thought I was blind, but I saw every single digital string he was pulling. I was completely ready for whatever he planned to throw at me. I zipped the suitcase shut, the sharp metallic sound cutting through the heavy silence of our bedroom. Marcus did not even look up from his phone. He stood by the window, his thumbs flying across the screen, a faint smirk playing on his lips. He thought I was entirely subdued. He thought his months of psychological torture had finally broken me into a compliant, unquestioning shell of a woman. To completely understand how I became this cold, calculating version of myself, standing over a suitcase that would soon become the centerpiece of his destruction, you have to understand the pure hell he put me through. The realization of his affair and his embezzlement did not happen overnight. It was preceded by a systematic, ruthless campaign to destroy my mind. It all peaked on a suffocating Friday evening 3 months prior. I had just wrapped up a massive penetration test at my firm, tearing apart the firewall records of a corrupt supply chain company. I came home exhausted, my eyes burning from staring at terminal screens. I walked into our dining room hoping for a quiet dinner with my husband. Instead, I found Marcus sitting at the head of the oak table, swirling a glass of expensive bourbon. His posture was rigid. The atmosphere in the room was dense, like the air right before a thunderstorm. I had confronted him that evening about a discrepancy I found by accident. A simple alert on our shared credit card for a $3,000 charge at a high-end boutique downtown. I asked him gently, thinking perhaps he had bought me a surprise gift. Marcus set his glass down. The sound of the heavy crystal hitting the wood felt like a gavel striking a block. He looked at me not with guilt, but with a deeply unsettling mask of pity. "There is no charge, Elena," he said softly. His voice was smooth-coated in a terrifyingly convincing layer of concern. "I checked the statement this morning. You must have read it wrong." I knew what I saw. I pulled out my phone to show him the alert, but the notification was entirely gone. The banking application showed no such transaction. He had already logged in and wiped the alert, moving funds to cover his tracks. I stared at the screen, my heart accelerating. "I know I saw it, Marcus. I know I did." He stood up, walked slowly over to me, and placed his large, warm hands heavily on my shoulders. He looked down into my eyes with a gaze that made me feel entirely transparent. "You spend all day hunting for hackers, Elena," he whispered. "You spend 70 hours a week digging through malicious code looking for lies. Now you are bringing that intense paranoia into our home. You are seeing ghosts where there are none. You are turning our marriage into an interrogation room." I tried to step back, but his grip tightened just enough to keep me in place. "Your mind is playing tricks on you, Elena," he said, his voice dropping to a sympathetic hush. "Your mind is playing tricks on you." Those words became the soundtrack of my daily life. He weaponized my career against me. Every time I noticed a flaw in his stories, every time I caught him in a lie about his whereabouts, he threw my profession back in my face. He told me the stress of cybersecurity was giving me paranoid delusions. The gaslighting escalated from financial discrepancies to everyday physical realities. I would leave my car keys on the kitchen counter, and an hour later they would be gone. I would find them hidden inside a drawer in the guest bathroom. When I panicked, Marcus would shake his head, wearing that same mask of profound pity. "You put them there, Elena. Do you not remember? Your mind is playing tricks on you." He started canceling my social plans, texting my friends from my phone while I was in the shower, claiming I was too exhausted or feeling under the weather. When my friends stopped calling, he convinced me that they were pulling away because my behavior had become too erratic. He isolated me entirely, building an invisible cage around my mind. I stopped sleeping. I walked through my own home like a complete stranger, constantly second-guessing my own memories, my own vision, my own sanity. I would stand in front of the bathroom mirror at 3 in the morning, staring at my pale face and dark, hollow eyes, wondering if my husband was right, wondering if my demanding career had finally shattered my perception of reality. "Your mind is playing tricks on you, Elena." The phrase echoed in the shower. It echoed in the silence of my morning commute. It echoed every time he kissed my forehead and told me I needed to seek psychiatric help. He was meticulously laying the groundwork. If I ever tried to accuse him of anything, he had already painted a masterpiece of a narrative. I was the overworked, unstable, paranoid wife. He was the patient, suffering husband. No one would believe a single word I said. But Marcus made a fatal error. He pushed me too far into the dark. When you push a woman who dismantles digital lies for a living into a corner, she does not stay blind. She adapts to the darkness. One Tuesday morning, I found a receipt for a luxury hotel stay crumpled in the pocket of his tailored suit. I did not ask him about it. I did not confront him. I held that small, damning piece of paper, and the fog in my mind instantly evaporated. The paralyzing self-doubt was replaced by a cold, sharp, and terrifying clarity. I was not crazy. I was being actively hunted. That realization was the exact catalyst. The victim he had carefully crafted died that morning, and the cybersecurity architect resurrected. From that second forward, I stopped arguing. I agreed with his gaslighting. I played the part of the fragile, broken wife. I let him believe his psychological warfare had completely succeeded, while I secretly turned my professional skills toward his entire life. I watched him by the window, now entirely unaware that the woman zipping her suitcase was no longer his prey. I had let him think my mind was playing tricks on me just so I could wrap my hands tightly around his throat. The transformation did not happen with a scream. It happened in absolute digital silence. Once Marcus left for the office that Tuesday, leaving me alone with the crumpled hotel receipt I had found in his suit, I walked into my home office and locked the heavy door. I sat at my desk, booted up my custom encrypted workstation, and cracked my knuckles. The fragile, paranoid wife stayed outside that door. The woman who sat in the ergonomic chair was an apex predator in her natural habitat. Marcus was a chief operating officer, which meant he thought he was the smartest man in any room regarding business strategy. But corporate operations and offensive cybersecurity are two entirely different beasts. He knew how to allocate budgets and project quarterly hardware earnings. I knew how to peel back layers of shell servers, untangle offshore crypto transfers, and follow the microscopic digital footprints that arrogant tech men always leave behind. His first mistake was underestimating my technical skill set. His second mistake was using our smart home network to access his hidden life. I started with the receipt. It was from a boutique hotel in downtown Manhattan, a place known for discreet high-end clientele. The date matched a Thursday night when Marcus had claimed he was locked in a grueling hardware testing facility until 2 in the morning. I logged into our internet service provider portal. Marcus had changed his phone passcode, but he had never bothered to secure the router handling traffic from his personal devices. I pulled the network logs from that Thursday. It did not take long to find the IP addresses associated with a secondary cryptocurrency exchange, one completely detached from our joint accounts. He was using a boutique wealth management platform. Security there was tight, but Marcus was highly predictable. He used variations of his childhood street name and his college graduation year for absolutely everything. Within 45 minutes, I had breached his hidden digital vault. When the dashboard finally loaded, the sheer volume of the numbers staring back at me made the breath catch violently in my throat. This was not just a secret account for buying occasional flowers or booking cheap motels. This was a parallel financial universe. I exported the transaction history into a massive database and let my fingers fly across the keyboard, running custom scripts, categorizing expenditures, and tracing blockchain routing numbers. The data painted a masterpiece of betrayal in absolute high definition. There were the luxury hotel charges, 3 nights in Aspen at a ski resort that required a minimum spend of $5,000 a night, a charge for a private helicopter charter to the Hamptons and the jewelry. The receipt for the $20,000 Cartier watch in Paris was just the absolute beginning. I found invoices for diamond earrings, custom necklaces, and a vintage sports car down payment. He was spending money with the reckless abandon of a lottery winner, bleeding hundreds of thousands of dollars into a life I was entirely excluded from. But who was wearing the diamonds? I cross-referenced the dates of the Aspen trip with his corporate travel itinerary. The flight records were heavily redacted on his end, but I accessed the airline booking patterns using a backdoor search methodology I utilized for corporate audits. 2 first-class tickets were booked under his corporate card, later reimbursed by this hidden account. The second passenger name was clearly visible in the raw data. Clue. The name hit me like a physical blow, yet it made perfect, sickening sense. Chloe, his 27-year-old public relations director, the girl who always greeted me with an overly enthusiastic smile and a high-pitched voice whenever I visited the tech campus. The girl who sent us a lovely fruit basket for our wedding anniversary. I closed my eyes and pictured her pristine manicured nails and her designer clothes that always seemed just a little too expensive for her salary. She was not just writing his press releases. She was wearing the Cartier necklaces. She was drinking champagne in the Hamptons. A lesser woman would have taken screenshots, printed the pages, and thrown them in his face the exact moment he walked through the door. A lesser woman would have screamed, demanded a divorce, and fought over the house. But I was not looking for a messy public divorce. The deeper I dug into the database, the more I realized that infidelity was merely a symptom of a much larger terminal disease. The math simply did not add up. Marcus made a lucrative salary, but not enough to sustain this level of unhinged luxury without draining our marital assets, which remained completely untouched. The money in this hidden account was coming from external crypto transfers routed through 3 different offshore shell servers. I spent the next 48 hours barely sleeping, fueled by black coffee and a burning icy rage. I traced the shell servers back to their origin. They were vendor accounts tied directly to his robotics firm. Marcus was creating phantom hardware invoices, approving them as chief operating officer, and funneling the corporate research and development funds directly into his hidden wealth management account. He was not just a cheating husband. He was a corporate embezzler, committing massive federal wire fraud. When I finally leaned back in my chair staring at the completed flowchart of his crimes, I felt a strange, profound sense of peace. The tears were entirely gone. The self-doubt was obliterated. He had tried to convince me I was losing my mind, but my mind had never been sharper. I decided right then and there to weaponize my pain. I became a ghost in my own home. When Marcus returned from work that evening, complaining about his stressful day, I greeted him with a warm, sympathetic smile. I took his coat. I poured his bourbon. I listened to his lies with wide, supportive eyes. Whenever he deployed his favorite gaslighting tactics, deliberately moving my keys or denying conversations we definitely had, I played my part flawlessly. I let my voice tremble. I apologized for my failing memory. I agreed that my job was making me too stressed and paranoid. I gave him exactly what he wanted, a broken, compliant, oblivious wife. Behind his back, I was systematically backing up every single document, every wire transfer, every fraudulent invoice, onto a highly encrypted offline server. I built an ironclad digital dossier that would not just guarantee me a favorable divorce settlement, but would guarantee him a long, brutal sentence in a federal penitentiary. I watched him text Chloe under the dinner table, and instead of feeling heartbreak, I felt the cold, thrilling anticipation of a hunter watching a wolf walk willingly into a steel trap. He thought he was the mastermind controlling the board. He had no idea I had already rigged the entire game. The charade continued for exactly 3 weeks before Marcus finally made his move. It was a Friday evening. I was in the kitchen, slicing vegetables, maintaining the illusion of domestic normalcy. The front door opened, and Marcus walked in, radiating an energy that immediately put me on high alert. He was vibrating with a manic, manufactured excitement. He walked straight into the kitchen, wrapped his arms around my waist from behind, and kissed the side of my neck. I forced my muscles to relax, leaning back into his embrace, while my mind raced to calculate what he was playing at. He spun me around and slapped a glossy, heavy-stock travel brochure onto the marble island. "Singapore," he announced, his voice practically singing. "I booked us 2 first-class suites for next Thursday. We are spending 10 days at a private luxury resort. Just you, me, and the city skyline." I stared at the brochure in calculated shock. "Singapore, Marcus, that is incredibly expensive. What about your quarterly product launches?" He waved his hand dismissively, pulling me into another tight hug. "The launches can wait." "You cannot. We have been struggling, Elena. I know I have been distant, and I know you have been dealing with so much stress and anxiety lately. I want to save our marriage. I want to take you away from all of this so we can reconnect and remember why we fell in love." It was a masterful performance. If I had not spent the last month tracing his embezzlement scheme and reading the luxury hotel receipts for his mistress, I might have cried tears of joy. Instead, I let my eyes well up with fake gratitude. I hugged him back, burying my face in his chest so he would not see my freezing gaze. "Thank you," I whispered. "This is exactly what we need." He pulled back, keeping his hands on my shoulders, and offered a slightly apologetic smile. "There is just one tiny catch," he said smoothly. "The flights I booked have a schedule conflict." The board threw a massive advance press junket on the calendar for Tokyo. I told them I could not make it, but they insisted someone from the executive team be there to handle the media. So I am sending Chloe and routing her through Singapore to save the company money. The name hung in the air between us. Chloe. My husband was taking me on a luxury vacation to save our marriage, and he was bringing his mistress on the exact same flight. The sheer audacity of the lie was breathtaking. Sending a public relations director on a luxury connecting flight for an alleged emergency press junket was an excuse so flimsy it bordered on insulting. He was treating me like an idiot. But I remembered the first rule of offensive cybersecurity: when the target hands you a fabricated access point, you do not block it. You accept its smile and use it to infiltrate their network. Oh, I said, keeping my voice light and entirely devoid of suspicion. Will she be sitting with us? Marcus laughed, shaking his head. Goodness, no. She is in premium economy. We are in first-class suites. She will grab her bags in Singapore, head to her connecting flight, and we will head to the resort. You will not even notice she is there. I promise. I nodded, offering him a bright, trusting smile. Well, if it keeps your job secure and gets us to the vacation, I suppose it is fine. He kissed my forehead, calling me the most understanding wife in the world, and went upstairs to shower. I stayed in the kitchen, staring at the glossy brochure. Singapore was an extradition nightmare. It was a country where an American woman could easily disappear into a legal system known for its absolutely uncompromising zero-tolerance drug policies. But Marcus was not the type to get his hands dirty with physical violence. He was a tech executive. He dealt in setups, leverage, and digital paper trails. If he was bringing Chloe, this was not a murder plot. It was a frame job. He needed me out of the picture permanently, and he needed a witness or an accomplice to help him execute it while in transit. The tension thickened like tar over the next 5 days. I went about my routine, packing my bags with deliberate care. I pulled my sleek silver hard-shell suitcase from the storage closet and began filling it with light dresses and swimwear. Every time I placed an item into the luggage, my mind ran through a dozen different worst-case scenarios. I knew he was going to use this luggage. It was the only variable in this trip he could control entirely. I made sure to leave the suitcase open in the corner of our bedroom, an inviting, vulnerable target for whatever he was planning. Marcus played the role of the devoted husband flawlessly that week. He brought home my favorite takeout. He rubbed my shoulders when I complained of a headache. He kept using that patronizing tone, telling me how good this trip would be for my mental health. You will feel so much better once we get out of the city, Elena. You will finally be able to let go of all this paranoia. Your mind will stop playing tricks on you. Each time he said it, I filed it away in the vault of my mind, turning his psychological abuse into pure, refined fuel. As Wednesday evening approached, the air in our house grew heavy with unspoken anticipation. I watched Marcus casually pack his own designer luggage, whistling a cheerful tune. He was so confident in his superiority. He truly believed he had outsmarted everyone, his company, his mistress, and most of all, his naive wife. He had no idea that I had already secured the evidence of his offshore crypto accounts. He had no idea that I knew every single detail of his illicit life. As I placed my favorite silk gown into my silver suitcase, I felt a strange thrill coursing through my veins. The trap was perfectly set, but he was the one walking blindly into the steel jaws. I closed the zipper halfway, leaving it perfectly accessible. The stage was ready. Tomorrow we would head to JFK Airport. Tomorrow, the long execution would begin, and I would be the only one holding the axe. The digital clock on the nightstand shifted from 2 to 2:01 in the morning. The harsh red glow illuminated the contours of our bedroom, casting long shadows across the floor. I lay perfectly still on my side of the king bed facing the wall. I regulated my breathing, drawing air in through my nose and pushing it out through my mouth in a slow cadence. I had to mimic the deep slumber of a wife who believed her husband was taking her on a romantic getaway. My eyes were closed, but my senses were heightened to an excruciating level. I was a wire-pulled taut, vibrating with anticipation. The mattress shifted. The sudden absence of Marcus's weight sent a cold rush of air against my spine. I kept my breathing steady. I did not flinch or move a single muscle. I opened my eyes just a fraction of an inch, peering through my eyelashes into the dimly lit room. Marcus stood beside the bed, silhouetted against the moonlight, filtering through the blinds. He stood perfectly still for a long moment, staring down at me, checking to see if his movement had disturbed me. I let out a soft, sleepy sigh and shifted my head slightly into the pillow, playing the part of the exhausted woman he believed me to be. He turned away satisfied. He moved with a practiced predatory silence. He crossed the room and stepped into his walk-in closet. I heard the faint rustle of fabric, followed by the metallic click of his biometric floor safe being unlocked. When he emerged a minute later, he was holding something substantial. It was a rectangular block, roughly the size of a thick textbook, entirely encased in matte silver duct tape. Even in the dim light, the package looked heavy and dense. It looked exactly like the kind of contraband laid out on metal tables during federal drug busts. He carried the silver brick over to the corner of the room where my sleek silver suitcase sat open and waiting. My heart hammered against my rib cage, a frantic, violent rhythm. I was terrified he could hear from across the room. "Your mind is playing tricks on you, Elena." The phrase echoed in the hollow chambers of my mind, loud and mocking. This was the exact moment the reality of his psychological warfare fully materialized into physical danger. He was not just gaslighting me to cover up a cheap office affair. He was orchestrating my absolute annihilation. Marcus knelt beside my suitcase. He reached into the pocket of his sweatpants and pulled out a small, sharp utility blade. I watched in horrific fascination as my husband carefully peeled back the clothes I had packed just hours earlier. He found the zipper at the base of the luggage shell, the one that accessed the internal structural lining. He unzipped it halfway, but the gap was not wide enough to accommodate the bulky silver package. Without a second of hesitation, Marcus pressed the utility blade against the heavy nylon fabric. He sliced the lining open. The tearing sound was faint, a soft hiss of breaking threads, but to me it sounded like a gunshot. It was the sound of my marriage being permanently severed. He wedged the heavy silver-taped bag deep into the cavity between the hard plastic shell and the fabric lining. He pressed it flat, maneuvering the corners to ensure it did not create any suspicious bulges. Once the package was perfectly concealed, he smoothed the sliced lining back into place and meticulously repacked my dresses over the hidden compartment. He zipped the main compartment shut, patting the top of the suitcase with a sickeningly triumphant gesture. "Your mind is playing tricks on you, Elena." The voice in my head was deafening now. The sheer magnitude of his betrayal washed over me like freezing water. He was not just planning to divorce me and leave me for his public relations director. He was sending me to a foreign prison in a jurisdiction known for mandatory life sentences or worse, for trafficking. He wanted me locked in a concrete cell, stripped of my rights, my career, and my freedom, completely unable to defend myself while he played the grieving husband back in New York. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. It was a sociopathic calculation that defied basic human empathy. He wanted me to spend the rest of my life rotting in a cage, questioning my own sanity. He stretched his arms over his head, letting out a quiet, satisfied exhale. The executioner had laid the trap. He walked back to his side of the bed, slipped under the duvet, and settled into the pillows. Within 10 minutes, his breathing deepened into a steady rhythm. He slept like a baby. He slept like a man who did not have the weight of a ruined life on his conscience. He had just signed my death warrant with a utility blade and a roll of silver duct tape, yet his chest rose and fell in perfect harmony. I lay there in the dark, my eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling. I did not cry. The fragile, paranoid wife he had tried to create was entirely dead. The woman lying next to him in the dark was entirely different. My grief had crystallized into something cold, hard, and terrifyingly precise. I waited another 30 minutes to ensure he was fully submerged in deep sleep. The house was dead silent. I slowly pushed the duvet off my shoulders. I swung my legs over the side of the bed, my bare feet touching the cold hardwood floor. The game was no longer his to control. The midnight betrayal was complete, and now it was my turn to move. The hardwood floor was freezing against my bare feet as I stepped away from the bed. I did not look back at Marcus. His deep, rhythmic breathing filled the room, a sound that once brought me comfort but now only cemented my resolve. I moved with the silent, practiced grace of a shadow, crossing the expansive master bedroom toward the corner where my sleek silver suitcase lay waiting. The moonlight spilled through the plantation shutters, illuminating the luggage like a crime scene exhibit. I knelt beside the suitcase, my knees pressing into the plush wool rug. My hands hovered over the zipper. I had to be meticulous. Every movement required the precision of a surgeon operating on a volatile patient. I slowly pulled the zipper open millimeter by millimeter, ensuring the metal teeth made absolutely no sound. The scent of my expensive floral perfume wafted up from the neatly folded clothes, a stark contrast to the betrayal buried beneath them. I carefully lifted the top layer of my silk dresses, setting them aside in the exact configuration they had been packed. I reached the bottom lining of the suitcase. My fingers traced the nylon fabric until they found the fresh, jagged slice Marcus had made just minutes prior. My heart hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs, but my hands remained entirely steady. I slipped my fingers into the dark cavity between the hard polycarbonate shell and the fabric lining. The package was dense and unyielding. It felt like a block of solid concrete. I gripped the edges of the silver duct tape and slowly worked it out of the tight space. The friction of the tape against the nylon produced a faint scraping noise, causing me to freeze. I held my breath, listening intently. Marcus's snoring hitched for a second, then resumed its steady cadence. I exhaled a slow, controlled stream of air and pulled the package entirely free. It weighed at least 3 pounds. Holding it in my hands, the reality of my husband's sociopathy became a physical weight. I cradled the silver brick against my chest and stood up. I bypassed our ensuite bathroom, knowing the bright lights and proximity to the bed were too risky. Instead, I glided silently out into the hallway and made my way to my home office on the opposite end of the second floor. I stepped inside, closed the heavy mahogany door, and engaged the deadbolt with a soft, definitive click. I turned on the small desk lamp, casting a concentrated pool of warm yellow light across my polished glass desk. I set the silver package down in the center of the illuminated circle. The duct tape was wrapped in overlapping, chaotic layers designed to make tampering obvious, but cybersecurity professionals are trained to dismantle complex structures without leaving a trace. I opened my desk drawer and retrieved a specialized crafting scalpel I used for precision wire cutting. I sat down, leaning closely over the package. I examined the seams of the tape, looking for the terminal edge where Marcus had finished his wrapping. I found the edge hidden on the underside. Holding my breath, I slid the razor-sharp tip of the scalpel beneath the adhesive. I applied a microscopic amount of pressure, slicing upward in a perfectly straight line. The thick tape parted cleanly. I peeled back the heavy silver layers one by one, working with excruciating patience to preserve the sticky integrity of the adhesive so it could be seamlessly resealed. Beneath the duct tape was a thick layer of industrial vacuum-sealed plastic. Through the transparent material, I saw it white powder. It was packed incredibly tight, compressed into a solid, chalky mass. My blood ran cold, chilling me down to the marrow of my bones. I am a digital investigator, not a narcotics expert, but the sheer volume of the synthetic substance staring back at me was unmistakable. This was not a recreational amount. This was a trafficking quantity. My mind instantly calculated the legal ramifications. Singapore operates under strict absolute law. International transit with this amount of synthetic narcotics carries mandatory draconian sentences, often resulting in capital punishment. Marcus was not just trying to get me arrested. He was sentencing me to execution in a foreign jurisdiction. He wanted me locked in a concrete cell, stripped of my rights, my career, and my freedom, completely unable to defend myself while he played the grieving husband back in New York. The sheer, breathtaking malice required to execute such a plan made my hands tremble for a brief, fleeting second. I stared at the powder, my mind racing through his strategy. But something bothered me. The package was thick, but the weight distribution felt slightly uneven when I carried it down the hall. My security instincts flared. You never look just at the surface data. You always look at what is buried beneath the code. I pressed my thumbs against the tightly sealed plastic, probing the dense block of powder. The surface was hard, but as I ran my fingers along the bottom edge, I felt a distinct, unnatural bulge. It was small, rectangular, and entirely rigid. It was not a clump of narcotics. It was hardware. Using the scalpel, I made a tiny, imperceptible incision at the very corner of the vacuum seal. The hiss of escaping air was barely audible. I manipulated the compressed powder, shifting the white mass just enough to push the hidden object toward the opening. A small black object slid out of the powder and hit the glass surface of my desk with a faint clink. It was a biometric encrypted solid-state drive. The device was sleek, heavily ruggedized, and bore the logo of a military-grade hardware manufacturer. It was the kind of drive used by top-tier executives to transport sensitive proprietary algorithms across hostile borders. I stared at the device, my analytical mind snapping the final puzzle pieces together. Marcus was a mastermind of corporate operations, but he suffered from the ultimate flaw of arrogant tech men. He wanted a clean sweep. He did not just want to frame me for smuggling. He was framing me for his corporate embezzlement and intellectual property theft. If the authorities detained me at the airport, they would seize the drugs and confiscate the drive as evidence. When they cracked the encryption, they would find the financial ledgers, the offshore routing numbers, and the digital footprints of the missing millions from his robotics company, all neatly packaged in my luggage. The authorities would conclude that I was the mastermind, the paranoid, unstable wife who embezzled millions and tried to flee the country with a bag full of narcotics. Marcus would be completely exonerated, a tragic victim of his wife's hidden criminal empire. He would keep the actual money safe in an offshore account, clear his name at the company, and walk away completely untouched. I picked up the solid-state drive. It was cold to the touch, a deadly digital weapon designed to bury my reputation alongside my freedom. I brushed a few specks of white powder off the metallic casing. The betrayal was so profound, so meticulously evil, that it transcended anger. It became absolute terrifying clarity. He wanted a war of information. He wanted to use digital forensics to destroy me. He had brought a knife to a drone strike. I gripped the drive tightly in my palm, booting up my heavily modified laptop. It was time to see exactly how much rope my husband had given me to hang him with. The cold metal of the drive slid into the port of my laptop. The screen flared to life, casting a harsh, pale blue light across my face. A sleek, minimalist fingerprint prompt materialized in the center of the display, backed by a numeric password request. This was military-grade encryption, the kind designed to wipe the drive entirely if the wrong input was entered 10 consecutive times. Marcus had purchased top-tier security, but he suffered from the fatal arrogance of a man who believed his wife was technologically inferior. He thought I spent my days running basic firewall checks. He did not realize my daily routine involved dismantling the encrypted fortresses of international hackers. I did not waste my limited attempts guessing his passwords. Instead, I launched a proprietary hardware spoofing protocol I had engineered years ago for penetrating locked devices. Lines of green code cascaded down my screen in a rapid, mesmerizing waterfall, mimicking a recognized biometric signature. I leaned back in my ergonomic chair, sipping a glass of ice water, watching my software violently dismantle his expensive digital lock. The silence of the house was absolute, save for the rhythmic low hum of my laptop fan. Every minute that passed felt like an hour. I kept one ear tuned to the hallway, listening for the creak of the floorboards that would signal Marcus waking up to find an empty bed. He was deeply asleep, sedated by the sheer confidence of his own sociopathy. 7 minutes later, a sharp, satisfying click echoed from the computer speakers. The encryption barrier collapsed. The drive mounted successfully onto my desktop. I opened the main directory. There were 3 distinct folders neatly organized with the clinical precision Marcus applied to everything. The first folder was labeled with the name of a dormant robotics prototype. I clicked it open. A massive, complex spreadsheet populated the screen. This was the master ledger. My eyes scanned the rows and columns, instantly translating the raw data into a horrific narrative. It perfectly mirrored the preliminary embezzlement trail I had uncovered weeks ago. But the scale was exponentially larger than I had calculated. Marcus had not just siphoned a few $100,000 for luxury trips with Chloe. He had systematically bled his company dry over a period of 4 years. He created an elaborate network of phantom suppliers, generating fake invoices for raw microchips that never existed. The funds were approved by his own department, paid out to shell servers, and immediately wire transferred to a labyrinth of offshore crypto accounts. I highlighted the final column and ran the sum. The total stolen assets amounted to exactly $12 million. I opened the second folder. This one contained a series of text documents filled with seemingly random strings of words, seed phrases. Marcus had not left the 12 million sitting in vulnerable international banks. He had meticulously converted the stolen fiat currency into untraceable cryptocurrency. He had broken the fortune down and stored it across multiple cold wallets. The digital keys required to access those wallets were sitting right here on this drive. With these phrases, he could access his stolen empire from a laptop, anywhere on the planet, from a private villa in Singapore, from a non-extradition paradise. The sheer scale of his greed was breathtaking, but it was the contents of the third folder that made the blood freeze in my veins. The folder was simply titled Archive. I opened it and found a collection of fabricated digital evidence. There were drafted emails manipulated to look as though they had been sent from my personal internet protocol address. The messages were directed to shady overseas chemical suppliers, discussing the logistics of moving synthetic narcotics. There was even a forged digital confession written in my tone, expressing deep regret for letting my financial greed push me into international smuggling. Marcus had manufactured an alternate reality where I was the criminal mastermind. The totality of his plot finally locked into place, a devastatingly perfect mechanism designed to obliterate my existence. The heavy package of narcotics in my suitcase was merely the physical bait. When the airport security dogs inevitably flagged my bag, the authorities would tear it apart. They would find the massive quantity of synthetic drugs and this heavily encrypted drive. Once international cyber units cracked the drive, they would discover the $12 million corporate theft and the fabricated emails tying me to both crimes. The authorities would look at my career as a cybersecurity architect and conclude I possess the exact skill set required to pull off such a massive corporate heist. They would assume I used the stolen company funds to purchase the narcotics, attempting to flee the country and start a new life. Marcus would stand in the airport terminal playing the role of the horrified, betrayed husband. He would cooperate fully with the authorities, tearfully handing over any information they requested. I would be tried and convicted in a foreign jurisdiction known for its draconian justice system. I would be locked inside a concrete cell, completely silenced, unable to defend myself against the mountain of digital evidence planted in my own luggage. Back in New York, Marcus would reap the ultimate rewards. As the innocent, grieving spouse, he would maintain control of our marital estate. He would cash out my substantial life insurance policies. The robotics company, believing they had caught the rogue hacker responsible for the theft, would close their internal investigations. Marcus's name would be completely cleared. He would wait a respectable amount of mourning time, and then he would quietly vanish. He would fly away to a beautiful sun-drenched island with his young PR director accessing his 12 million in untraceable cryptocurrency. They would live like royalty on the ashes of my destroyed life. It was a flawless execution strategy, assuming the victim was an oblivious, trusting wife who would blindly carry a tampered suitcase into an international airport. But Marcus had profoundly misjudged his opponent. He thought he was playing a game of chess against a pawn. He did not realize I had already flipped the entire board. I sat back in my chair staring at the screen. The initial shock had entirely evaporated, replaced by an absolute glacial resolve. He wanted to destroy me with data. He wanted to use my own profession to dig my grave. I reached for my encrypted external hard drive and plugged it into the laptop. I began to copy every single file, every seed phrase, every fabricated email, and the master ledger of his $12 million theft. I was taking his ammunition. I was taking his future. I was taking his life. The transfer progress bar glowed neon green across my screen, a steady, relentless march toward 100%. I watched every single byte of Marcus's stolen empire flow from his heavily encrypted hardware directly into my ghost server. I had set up this untraceable cloud architecture years ago for safeguarding whistleblower documents and tracking offshore corporate fraud. It was housed on servers located in jurisdictions that would never yield to a subpoena from any federal agency. Now it was holding the digital execution order for my husband. The file transfer completed with a crisp hollow chime, I safely ejected the solid-state drive and pulled it from the port. It felt entirely different in my hand. Now it was no longer a mystery. It was a loaded weapon. I looked down at the silver brick of synthetic narcotics resting on my glass desk. A normal person, a civilian untouched by the brutal realities of the legal system, would have grabbed their smartphone immediately. They would have dialed emergency services, screaming for the police to come to the house, pointing frantically at the drugs and the sleeping husband in the master bedroom. But I am not a civilian. I am a cybersecurity architect. I spent my life in deposition rooms watching high-priced corporate defense attorneys twist reality until the truth is entirely unrecognizable. If I called the police right now, Marcus would wake up, rub his eyes, and play the bewildered victim. He would look at the officers with that practiced, pitying expression. He would tell them I had been acting erratically for months. He would claim he had never seen that package before in his life. He would suggest with a trembling voice that my demanding career had finally pushed me into a psychological break, and I had somehow acquired these drugs in a manic episode. Without hard, irrefutable proof that he placed the package in my bag, the narrative would become a muddy, chaotic dispute between spouses. He had the corporate pedigree, the expensive suits, and the carefully cultivated reputation of a dedicated chief operating officer. I would be the hysterical wife holding 3 pounds of narcotics in my own home office. The risk was simply unacceptable. Marcus needed to be caught in a scenario where his guilt was absolute ones of his loot. He needed to be caught holding the bag entirely stripped of his ability to spin a fabricated story. He needed to step into a trap so perfectly engineered that even the most expensive corporate lawyers in New York could not save him. I would not let him negotiate a plea deal or claim ignorance. I would let his own greed and arrogance lead him to the slaughter. I picked up the solid-state drive and slid it back into the tiny incision I had made in the vacuum-sealed plastic. I pushed it deep into the compressed white powder, ensuring it was buried exactly where he had placed it. Next, I reached into my crafting drawer and pulled out a roll of matte silver duct tape. I had purchased this specific brand for binding heavy hardware cases. It was an exact match to the tape Marcus had used. I worked with the steady, measured precision of a bomb technician. I wrapped the fresh tape over the incision, pressing it flat, smoothing out any microscopic air bubbles or creases. I replicated the chaotic overlapping pattern he had utilized, ensuring the visual integrity of the package remained completely undisturbed. When I finished, I held the heavy silver brick under the desk lamp. It was flawless. Marcus could inspect it closely and never suspect it had been breached, decrypted, and weaponized against him. I carried the heavy package back down the dark hallway, my bare feet silent against the hardwood floor. The master bedroom was exactly as I had left it. The moonlight still painted long shadows across the rug. Marcus was still snoring softly, his chest rising and falling in deep, ignorant slumber. I knelt beside my open silver suitcase. I did not put the package back into the lining. That was his plan, not mine. Instead, I left the lining perfectly sliced, pushing my folded clothes back into place to make it look as though the package was still hidden underneath. I zipped the suitcase completely shut. I took the silver brick and walked into my walk-in closet, hiding it deep inside my oversized leather tote bag. A bag I would be carrying right next to me during the morning commute. The decision to let his own arrogance destroy him settled over me like a heavy, comforting blanket. I was not just going to survive this. I was going to orchestrate a spectacular public annihilation. I would let him walk into the international terminal, believing he was the smartest man in the world. I would let him feel the intoxicating thrill of his impending victory. And then, at the very last possible second, I would execute the ultimate game of sleight of hand. He wanted to use Chloe as a prop, a naive PR director to run away with once I was locked in a foreign cell. It was only fitting that she became the vessel for his downfall. I walked into the master bathroom and turned on the cold water tap. I splashed the freezing water onto my face, staring at my reflection in the vanity mirror. The woman looking back at me was unrecognizable from the devoted wife who had lived in this house for 6 years. Her eyes were dark, flat, and completely devoid of mercy. I dried my face with the towel and walked back into the bedroom. I slipped under the duvet, pulling the heavy fabric up to my shoulders. I lay a mere 2 feet away from the man who had actively planned my demise. I could feel the heat radiating off his skin. I could hear the faint, rhythmic sound of his breath. I did not feel an ounce of fear. I felt a profound, chilling anticipation. The trap was set, the evidence was secured. The strategy was locked into place. I closed my eyes and allowed myself to drift into a light, calculating sleep. Tomorrow morning the sun would rise over New York, and I would wake up and play the role of the loving, unsuspecting wife one final time. I would smile at him over coffee. I would hold his hand in the back of the car, and I would watch him march happily toward his own absolute destruction. Morning arrived with the harsh blare of the alarm. Marcus was already awake, moving around the bedroom with an irritating level of energy. He kissed my cheek, handed me a cup of coffee, and told me to get dressed because our private car was waiting. I played my part beautifully. I stretched, offered a sleepy, grateful smile, and told him how excited I was. I grabbed my leather tote bag from the closet, feeling the heavy, dense weight of the silver brick resting safely at the bottom, concealed beneath my laptop and a cashmere scarf. Marcus grabbed my silver suitcase, carrying it down the stairs with exaggerated care. He thought he was carrying his golden ticket. He had no idea he was carrying an empty shell. We stepped out into the crisp New York morning. A luxury SUV idled in our driveway. The driver stepped out to open the trunk, but Marcus insisted on loading my silver suitcase himself. He placed it gently into the back, giving it one final satisfied pat. I watched him from the curb, clutching my tote bag to my chest, masking my cold anticipation with a bright, vacation-ready smile. Marcus opened the rear passenger door for me. I slid onto the leather seat. That was when I saw her. Chloe was sitting in the front passenger seat. She turned around, flashing a brilliant, perfectly glossed smile. "Good morning, Elena," she said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "Marcus mentioned it would be more efficient to share the car to the airport, since my flight to Tokyo leaves around the same time as your flight to Singapore. I hope you do not mind." I forced my face to soften into an expression of pleasant surprise. "Not at all, Chloe," I replied, my voice steady and light. "It makes perfect sense. We are all heading to the exact same place." Marcus slid into the back seat next to me, closing the heavy door. The SUV pulled away from the curb, beginning the journey to John F. Kennedy International Airport. The interior of the vehicle was suffocatingly quiet at first, filled only with the soft hum of the engine. The spatial dynamic was a masterpiece of betrayal. Marcus sat shoulder to shoulder with his wife, while his mistress sat mere inches away in the front seat. I kept my eyes focused on the rear-view mirror. I could see Chloe's reflection clearly. She was not looking at the road. She was looking at Marcus. Every few minutes her eyes would dart up to the mirror, catching his gaze. A subtle, mocking smirk played on her lips. She was enjoying this. She loved the thrill of sitting in the same car as the oblivious wife, sharing a secret, deadly joke with the man who was about to destroy my life. Marcus was reveling in it too. He reached over and took my hand, lacing his fingers through mine. "You look beautiful this morning, Elena," he said, his thumb rubbing the back of my hand. "This trip is going to change everything for us. We are going to leave all our heavy baggage right here in New York and just focus on the future." The dramatic irony of his words hung in the narrow space of the SUV. He thought he was delivering a clever double entendre about leaving his marriage and me behind in a prison cell. I looked at him, squeezing his hand tightly. "I completely agree, Marcus," I said, matching his earnest tone. "I feel lighter already. It is amazing how much better you feel when you finally get rid of the things that have been weighing you down." Chloe's eyes met mine in the rear-view mirror for a fraction of a second. Her smirk widened. She thought my response was pathetic, the desperate clinging of a woman trying to save a doomed marriage. She turned her head slightly toward the passenger window, hiding a quiet scoff. "Are you ready for your big press junket in Tokyo?" I asked Chloe, leaning forward slightly. "Marcus says you are handling some incredibly sensitive public relations. It must be a lot of pressure to carry all that corporate weight by yourself." Chloe shifted in her seat, adjusting her expensive designer scarf. "Oh, it is nothing I cannot handle, Elena. Marcus trusts me implicitly with his most valuable assets. I know exactly how to execute his plans." She glanced at Marcus in the mirror again, her eyes shining with malicious delight. Marcus let out a low, booming laugh, patting my knee. Chloe is a consummate professional, Elena. She always delivers exactly what I ask for without leaving a single trace of an error. That is why she is absolutely indispensable to my operations. They were practically high-fiving each other in front of my face. The sheer arrogance required to taunt me so openly was staggering. They felt invincible. They believed they were the predators playing with their food before the slaughter. I sat back against the leather seat, resting my hand on the leather tote bag in my lap. Through the thick material, my fingertips grazed the solid outline of the silver duct tape package. "It is so important to have people you can trust," I murmured, looking out the window at the passing highway traffic, especially when you are dealing with things that could ruin your life if they ever got out. You really have to be careful about who is holding your baggage at the end of the day. The luxury SUV hit a slight bump on the busy interstate. Marcus pulled his hand away to check a quick notification on his phone. "We are making very great time," he announced. "We will be at the VIP terminal in 20 minutes. The security lines there are an absolute breeze. We will all walk right through without a single hiccup today." I simply smiled at my reflection in the dark glass. He was right about one thing. Everything was about to change forever. The luxury SUV glided to a smooth halt outside the glass and steel facade of the international terminal. A uniformed porter immediately approached the vehicle, but Marcus waved him off with a sharp, frantic gesture. He insisted on handling the luggage himself, his knuckles turning white as he gripped the handle of my silver suitcase. He hauled it out of the trunk as if it contained the crown jewels. Setting it carefully on the concrete, Chloe retrieved her pristine Gucci rolling bag, the wheels, gliding silently across the pavement. I stepped out into the biting New York wind, clutching my heavy leather tote bag tightly against my side. The silver brick of narcotics rested securely at the bottom, an anchor pulling me toward the inevitable climax. We moved through the sliding glass doors and away from the chaotic masses of the main terminal. Marcus bypassed the standard check-in counters, entirely guiding us toward the frosted glass entrance of the exclusive first-class lounge. This was a sanctuary designed for the elite, a place where the wealthy could sip espresso and drink complimentary champagne before facing the minor inconvenience of the priority security checkpoint, located just beyond the lounge exit. The heavy glass doors slid open, muting the frantic airport noise. The lounge was wrapped in an atmosphere of hushed privilege. Soft jazz played from invisible speakers. Business executives typed quietly on laptops, while attendants in crisp vests circulated with silver trays. Marcus selected a secluded seating area in the far corner, flanked by tall, frosted glass partitions that offered a strategic amount of privacy. He positioned my silver suitcase directly against the wall, keeping it well within his line of sight. Chloe parked her designer luggage right next to my leather chair, carelessly abandoning it as she threw her trench coat over the armrest. Marcus sat opposite me, bouncing his knee rapidly. His facade of the relaxed romantic husband was beginning to crack under the immense pressure of his own plot. He checked his watch again, then stared at the entrance to the priority security checkpoint, visible through the glass walls of the lounge. He was calculating the final steps of his execution. I sat perfectly still, maintaining a serene, untroubled expression, while my mind mapped the exact geography of the room. I noted the location of the security cameras. I tracked the patrol patterns of the lounge attendants. I measured the precise distance between my chair and Chloe's luggage. 10 minutes passed in suffocating silence. The tension radiating from Marcus was so palpable, it felt like a physical weight in the air. He pulled his phone from his pocket, staring at a blank screen, and suddenly gasped in fabricated surprise. "It is the investors," he announced, his voice tight with manufactured urgency. "They must be reviewing the preliminary hardware disclosures. I have to take this call before we go through security. It might take a few minutes." He stood up abruptly, pointing toward a row of soundproof glass phone booths situated on the opposite side of the lounge. "Order a mimosa, Elena," he instructed, forcing a tight smile. "I will be right back, and then we will head straight to the gate." I watched him stride away, his back rigid, a man marching toward a conversation with an empty dial tone. He stepped into the soundproof booth and turned his back to the seating area, pressing the phone to his ear in a desperate pantomime of corporate crisis. I was left alone with Chloe. She sat across from me, scrolling through her social media feed with an air of profound boredom. She did not bother making conversation. In her mind, I was already a ghost. I was a naive, disposable obstacle, standing between her and a stolen fortune. She sighed heavily, locking her phone and dropping it into her purse. "I need to fix my lipstick," Chloe declared, not looking at me. "The dry air in this place is an absolute nightmare." She stood up, smoothing the wrinkles from her expensive silk blouse. She did not take her Gucci rolling bag with her. Why would she? She was leaving it in the care of a woman she perceived as entirely harmless. A woman who was too oblivious to notice her own husband slipping away. Chloe turned on her heel and walked confidently toward the luxury restrooms located down a short curved hallway near the entrance of the lounge. I watched her figure disappear around the corner. I shifted my gaze back to the soundproof booth. Marcus was still facing the wall, gesturing animatedly to an imaginary board of investors. I was completely alone. The adrenaline hit my bloodstream like a violent electrical surge. My heart slammed against my ribs with a force that threatened to shatter my chest. My vision tunneled, stripping away the soft jazz, the ambient chatter, and the clinking of champagne flutes. The entire world narrowed down to the pristine designer bag, sitting exactly 14 inches from my right foot. My internal clock initiated a ruthless, unforgiving countdown. I had exactly 3 minutes. 3 minutes before Chloe finished reapplying her makeup. 3 minutes before Marcus ended his theatrical phone call. 3 minutes to execute the most dangerous transaction of my life. I did not panic. The cybersecurity architect took absolute control of my nervous system. I operate in fractions and tight windows, in the spaces where greedy people leave themselves vulnerable. I took a deep, silent breath, flooding my lungs with oxygen. I casually shifted my body weight, sliding to the very edge of my leather chair. I unzipped the top of my oversized tote bag. I plunged my hand deep into the dark interior, pushing past my laptop and my cashmere scarf. My fingers brushed against the rough, unmistakable texture of the silver duct tape. The brick of synthetic narcotics was heavy, cold, and waiting. My grip tightened around it, preparing to pull the trigger on a trap that would tear their lives apart piece by piece. The 3-minute window was closing fast. The lounge remained quiet. No one was looking in my direction. The business travelers were absorbed in their screens. The attendants were busy near the buffet. The stage was perfectly, miraculously clear. I glanced one last time toward the hallway leading to the restrooms, entirely empty. I looked at the soundproof booth. Marcus was still facing the wall. The countdown ticked mercilessly in my head. 2 minutes and 45 seconds remaining. The stakes had never been higher, and my hands had never been steadier. I pulled the silver package free from my tote bag, keeping it low and hidden beneath the drape of my long coat. The moment of absolute destruction had officially begun. I shifted my weight off the leather armchair and slid down to the thick carpeted floor in a single fluid motion. From the perspective of the business travelers across the lounge, I simply looked like a woman reaching down to adjust her shoe. But from my vantage point behind the frosted glass partition, I had uninhibited access to the pristine Gucci rolling bag sitting abandoned on the rug. 2 minutes and 30 seconds remained. The designer luggage was practically mocking me with its interlocking logo pattern. Chloe had positioned the bag with the main zipper facing outward, completely unsecured. She was so convinced of her own safety, so entirely wrapped in the delusion of her upcoming tropical victory, that she had not even bothered to lock the small brass padlock dangling from the side handle. I reached out and gripped the custom gold zipper pulls. The metal was freezing cold against my skin. I pulled the zippers apart. The luxury hardware glided open with zero resistance, parting in absolute silence. The interior of Chloe's bag smelled overwhelmingly of expensive perfume and fresh leather. My eyes scanned the contents with the rapid, calculating efficiency of a hacker mapping a network layout. She had packed with careless arrogance. Tangled silk camisoles lay haphazardly over designer swimwear. A velvet jewelry pouch sat brazenly near the top. I pushed my hand past her expensive garments, driving deep into the bottom framework of the suitcase. 2 minutes remaining. My fingers searched the fabric along the base of the luggage. I needed a compartment deep enough to conceal a 3-pound brick of synthetic narcotics and corporate treason. I found a secondary zipper running along the spine of the suitcase, an internal lining compartment meant for storing damp clothing or shoes. I grabbed the small plastic pull tab and ripped it open. The space inside was perfectly hollow. I lifted the silver-taped package from the folds of my long coat. The brick felt exponentially heavier now that it was entirely exposed. It held a mandatory life sentence. It held the $12 million Marcus had bled from his company. It held the digital forged emails designed to bury me in a foreign prison. I did not hesitate. I shoved the heavy silver package deep into the internal cavity of Chloe's designer bag. I pushed the brick flat against the hard polycarbonate spine, maneuvering the corners, so they nested perfectly against the wheel wells. I pressed my palms against the heavy plastic feeling. The vacuum-sealed drugs settle into the foundation of the luggage. I smoothed the internal nylon lining over the package, ensuring no unnatural bulges protruded upward. It fit flawlessly. The burden of my husband's betrayal had officially been transferred. 1 minute and 20 seconds remaining. I grabbed the internal zipper and pulled it closed, sealing the narcotics and the encrypted solid-state drive securely into the darkness. I quickly rearranged her tangled silk camisoles, draping them back over the bottom lining in the exact chaotic pattern she had left them. I pulled the 2 gold exterior zippers together, closing the Gucci bag entirely. I adjusted the handles to match the exact angle Chloe had left them. I slid back up into my leather armchair, my heart pounding a violent rhythm against my ribs. My hands were shaking slightly from the massive adrenaline spike. I wiped my palms against the fabric of my trousers, grabbed the stem of my mimosa glass, and took a deep, grounding breath. The physical swap had taken exactly 75 seconds. 1 minute remaining. I looked across the sprawling lounge. Marcus was still trapped inside the soundproof glass phone booth, his back turned to the seating area. He was nodding emphatically, pointing his finger and selling his fabricated corporate emergency to an empty line. He looked so powerful in his tailored suit. He had no idea his entire future had just been relocated into the luggage of the woman he was sleeping with. Then a sharp rhythmic sound cut through the ambient noise of the lounge. Click, click, click. The unmistakable sound of designer heels striking the polished marble hallway leading from the restrooms. The footsteps were moving fast, sharp, and highly purposeful. My internal clock screamed. 45 seconds. The footsteps grew louder, echoing off the frosted glass partitions. Someone was walking directly toward our secluded corner. I crossed my legs, adjusted the collar of my blouse, and brought the rim of the mimosa glass to my lips. I regulated my breathing, forcing my chest to rise and fall in a slow, relaxed cadence. I stared blankly at a digital departure board mounted on the far wall, the absolute picture of a bored-waiting wife. The footsteps rounded the corner. Chloe stepped into our seating area. Her lipstick was flawlessly reapplied in a vibrant, aggressive shade of red. Not a single hair was out of place. She carried herself with the arrogant strut of a woman who believed she had already won the war. She glanced downward at her Gucci bag resting on the carpet. It looked completely untouched. She had absolutely no inkling that her pristine luggage was now a ticking time bomb waiting to obliterate her life. Chloe dropped heavily into the chair across from me. She crossed her legs and picked up her phone, completely ignoring my presence. She let out a soft, theatrical sigh of inconvenience, tapping her manicured nails against her screen. "Marcus certainly takes his time, does he not?" she murmured, her eyes glued to her device. "You would think the investors could survive without him for a few hours. He works entirely too hard." I lowered my mimosa glass, letting the cool crystal rest against my knee. The irony of her statement was almost suffocating. I looked directly at her perfectly contoured face. I thought about the heavy silver package resting just inches beneath her designer boots. I thought about the armed federal agents waiting on the other side of the security checkpoint. I offered her a sweet, chilling smile. "He is incredibly dedicated," I replied, my voice smooth and perfectly pleasant. "But do not worry, Chloe. I have a feeling Marcus is about to take a very long, Very permanent vacation from all of his corporate responsibilities. He just needs to get through security first. Chloe finally looked up from her phone. She met my gaze, her eyes narrowing for a fraction of a second. She detected something strange in my tone, a subtle, razor-sharp edge she could not quite identify. But her arrogance quickly overrode her instincts. She smirked, returning her attention to her screen. "I certainly hope so, Elena," she said dismissively. "I think we are all ready for a change of scenery." I took another sip of my drink, letting the citrus and champagne burn the back of my throat. I stared at the Gucci bag on the floor, then looked up at the soundproof booth. Marcus was hanging up his phone, turning around with a triumphant, satisfied smile. He stepped out of the booth and began walking toward us, completely unaware that he was marching straight into a slaughterhouse. The 3-minute window had closed. The trap was locked. It was time to walk to the guillotine. Marcus approached our seating area with long, rapid strides. He slid his phone into his tailored suit pocket and clapped his hands together, a sharp sound that echoed in our quiet corner. "Crisis averted," he announced, his voice overly loud and strained with artificial relief. "The investors accepted my preliminary numbers. We are completely in the clear." He looked at me, then glanced quickly at my silver suitcase resting against the frosted glass partition. His eyes lingered on the zipper for a fraction of a second too long. "Ready to go, darling?" I stood up smoothly, smoothing the wrinkles from my trousers. "Absolutely ready." Chloe rose from her chair, grabbing the handle of her Gucci rolling bag. The bag that now carried a federal prison sentence hidden deep within its lining. She adjusted her designer trench coat and offered Marcus a brief, knowing smile. "Let us get moving," she said. "I have a long flight ahead of me." Marcus reached for my silver suitcase, his knuckles turning white as he gripped the handle. He hauled it up with a sudden jerky movement, overcompensating for the weight he expected to feel. A look of confusion flashed across his face when the suitcase lifted far easier than it should have. The 3-pound brick of narcotics was gone, but his brain had not yet processed the physical discrepancy. He readjusted his grip, blaming the adrenaline pumping through his veins. I picked up my leather tote bag, slinging it over my shoulder, and stepped into the aisle. We exited the first-class lounge and merged into the bustling flow of the international terminal. The walk to the priority security checkpoint was a mere 200 yards, but the psychological distance felt like a marathon. I observed Marcus closely as we walked. His facade of the relaxed husband was rapidly deteriorating. A heavy sheen of sweat had formed on the back of his neck, glistening under the bright terminal lights. He was walking entirely too fast, his long legs eating up the polished concrete floor, forcing Chloe and me to hurry our pace just to keep up. He kept looking over his shoulder, checking to make sure I was right behind him. He wanted to keep his prize securely in his line of sight. Chloe trailed slightly to my left. The polyurethane wheels of her Gucci bag hummed a steady, rhythmic tune against the floor. Every rotation of those wheels carried $12 million in stolen corporate funds and 3 pounds of synthetic narcotics closer to the federal authorities. She was complaining about the dry airport air, utterly oblivious to the fact that she was currently the highest value target in the entire building. The contrast between my husband's frantic energy and my absolute glacial calm was striking. I matched his urgent pace, step for step, but my breathing remained perfectly regulated. I was a spectator watching a tragedy unfold in slow motion. Marcus was rushing toward his own execution, dragging his mistress along as collateral damage. He thought he was playing the final move in a chess match he had rigged from the start. He had no idea the board had been flipped. The priority security checkpoint loomed ahead. The area was cordoned off with thick velvet ropes and staffed by stern-faced agents. Beyond the podiums, the massive gray X-ray scanners swallowed luggage on heavy black conveyor belts. Marcus practically shoved his boarding pass and identification at the agent, working the podium. He bounced on the balls of his feet, his jaw clenched so tight, the muscles in his cheek twitched. I handed my documents to the agent with a polite, easy smile, offering a pleasant morning greeting. The agent nodded, checked my passport against my ticket, and waved us through. We entered the screening area. The air smelled of ozone floor wax and the nervous sweat of rushing travelers. The ambient noise was a chaotic symphony of rattling plastic bins, sharp commands from security personnel, and the low mechanical drone of the scanning machines. Marcus bypassed an empty lane and aggressively steered us toward a specific conveyor belt on the far right. He wanted a lane, with a clear, unobstructed view of the monitor. He wanted front row seats to my destruction. He grabbed 3 gray plastic bins from the stack and slammed them onto the metal rollers. He turned to me, his eyes wide and dilated with manic anticipation. "Go ahead, Elena," he urged, his voice trembling slightly with suppressed excitement. "You go first. Put your things on the belt. Let us get you through quickly so we can relax." He physically stepped aside, blocking Chloe from moving forward, ensuring I was the one standing directly in front of the machine. He positioned himself perfectly to watch the agent's face when my silver suitcase entered the scanner. I stepped up to the stainless steel rollers. The moment had finally arrived. The culmination of months of horrific gaslighting, obsessive digital tracking, and meticulous midnight planning, all hinged on the next 60 seconds. I did not hesitate. I moved with fluid grace. I took off my coat and laid it neatly inside the first gray bin. I placed my heavy leather tote bag into the second bin, making sure my laptop was removed and placed in a separate tray as required by federal regulations. Then I reached for the handle of my silver suitcase. Marcus hovered just inches away from my shoulder, his breathing shallow and erratic. He was practically vibrating with a toxic mix of fear and impending victory. I lifted the silver suitcase and placed it squarely onto the conveyor belt. The heavy material settled against the rubber rollers with a dull thud. I looked at Marcus. His eyes were fixed on the bag with a horrifying, hungry intensity. He was waiting for the sirens to blare. He was waiting for the heavy hands of the law to pull me down to the cold floor. I turned my attention back to the security lane. I stood perfectly still, letting my hands fall relaxed at my sides. My heartbeat was a steady, powerful drum in my chest. I watched the heavy black rubber flaps of the X-ray machine part, swallowing my suitcase into the dark scanning tunnel. I did not look away. I waited for the machine to do its job, knowing with absolute terrifying certainty that the screen would show nothing but silk dresses and light clothing. The heavy black rubber flaps of the X-ray machine swallowed my suitcase. I kept my eyes fixed on the illuminated monitor suspended above the agent's station. The screen displayed a vibrant, shifting landscape of colors as the internal contents of my luggage were stripped bare by the penetrating radiation. Bright blues indicated the metallic zippers and hardware. Dense oranges and greens mapped out the organic material of my folded silk dresses. Marcus was standing so close to the conveyor belt that his tailored suit jacket brushed against the stainless steel edge. He was leaning forward, his neck craned at an unnatural angle to get a clear view of the monitors. He was waiting for a massive, dense block of orange to appear on the screen. He was waiting for the unmistakable rectangular void that indicated a densely packed brick of synthetic narcotics. He held his breath. His entire body was a coiled spring wound so tightly that I could practically see the adrenaline coursing through the veins in his neck. The agent stared blankly at the screen. He held a half-empty bottle of water in one hand, his eyes glazed over with the profound boredom of a man who had already stared at 1,000 identical suitcases that morning. The conveyor belt hummed its steady mechanical tune. The glowing image of my luggage scrolled smoothly across the monitor. There was no rectangular void. There was no dense, anomalous block of organic matter hidden in the lining. There was absolutely nothing out of the ordinary. The agent blinked lazily, took a sip of his water, and looked away from the screen. He did not hit the red emergency stop button. He did not reach for his radio. He did not signal the armed officers standing near the perimeter. The heavy rubber flaps on the exit side of the machine parted, and my sleek silver suitcase rolled out into the bright terminal light, completely untouched. I turned away from the belt and stepped confidently toward the advanced imaging technology scanner. I handed my boarding pass to the agent guarding the entrance, offered a polite nod, and stepped inside the cylindrical machine. I placed my feet precisely on the yellow painted footprints. I raised my arms above my head, locking my hands together in the designated position. the mechanical arm of the scanner whirred to life, rotating swiftly around my body. I closed my eyes for a fraction of a second, reveling in the absolute pristine cleanliness of my current state. I was carrying nothing but my identification and a boarding pass. I was legally and physically untouchable. "Step out, please," the agent instructed, pointing toward the exit. I stepped out of the scanner. The small monitor attached to the machine displayed a solid, comforting green screen. No anomalies detected. No secondary pat-down required. I was entirely clear. I walked casually over to the stainless steel collection area where my plastic bins and my silver suitcase were waiting. I slipped my shoes back onto my feet. I grabbed my laptop from its plastic tray and slid it effortlessly into my heavy leather tote bag. Then I wrapped my fingers around the telescopic handle of my silver suitcase and pulled it off the rollers. I looked back across the security lane at my husband. Marcus had not moved a single inch. He was frozen in place, staring at the empty space on the conveyor belt where my suitcase had been just moments before. His hands were gripping the edge of the metal table so fiercely that his knuckles were entirely white. The color had completely vanished from his face, leaving his skin a sickly ashen gray. He looked like a man who had just watched the laws of physics reverse themselves in front of his eyes. His reality was actively shattering into a million jagged pieces. He looked at the bored security agent, then back to the empty conveyor belt, and finally his panicked gaze snapped across the checkpoint to meet mine. I offered him a gentle, encouraging wave. Marcus opened his mouth, but no sound came out. His chest began to heave in rapid, shallow jerks. He was hyperventilating. The meticulous, arrogant tech executive was actively short-circuiting in the middle of the priority security lane. His brain was desperately trying to process an impossible equation. He knew exactly what he had done at 2 a.m. He vividly remembered the feel of the utility blade slicing through the nylon fabric of my luggage. He remembered the heavy, dense weight of the silver duct tape package. He remembered burying it, hiding it, sealing my fate with his own 2 hands. And yet the suitcase had passed through federal security without raising a single alarm. I could see the frantic, terrified calculations racing behind his wide eyes. Had the X-ray machine malfunctioned, that was statistically impossible. Had the security agent simply missed it, a package that large would be glaringly obvious even to a blind man. Did he somehow forget to pack it? No. The memory was burned into his mind. He had felt the package. He had secured the zipper. The only remaining logical conclusion was so terrifying, so fundamentally disruptive to his sense of control, that his mind simply refused to accept it. The package was gone. Marcus took a stumbling half-step backward, bumping heavily into the person standing directly behind him. He did not even turn around to apologize. A bead of cold sweat broke loose from his hairline, trailing a slow, agonizing path down the side of his pale cheek. His tailored suit suddenly looked 2 sizes too big for his deflating frame. He reached a trembling hand up to loosen his silk tie, struggling to pull oxygen into his restricting lungs. "Move forward, sir," an agent barked, pointing impatiently at the empty space in front of Marcus. "You are holding up the line. Put your items in the bin and step through the metal detector." Marcus jumped at the sharp command, his shoulders twitching violently. He looked completely lost. He fumbled blindly with his pockets, pulling out his wallet, his keys, his expensive phone, dumping them into a gray plastic tray with clumsy, uncoordinated movements. His hands were shaking so severely that a few coins spilled over the edge and clattered loudly against the stainless steel table. "Sir," the agent repeated, her voice dripping with irritation. "Your bags, place them on the belt." Right behind him, Chloe let out a loud, exaggerated sigh of annoyance. "Marcus, honestly," she muttered, pushing her pristine Gucci rolling bag forward until it bumped against the back of his calves. "What is taking you so long? You are holding both of us up. Just push the bins forward so I can get my things through." Marcus did not answer her. He could not speak. He was entirely consumed by the blinding panic of a predator who suddenly realized he was standing in the middle of an empty trap. He shoved his briefcase and his overnight bag onto the conveyor belt with jerky mechanical shoves. He stumbled blindly toward the metal detector, his eyes glazed, his mind spinning wildly out of control. I stood patiently at the end of the collection area, gripping the handle of my completely clean suitcase. I watched Chloe lift her heavy designer luggage onto the metal rollers. I watched her push it toward the dark, gaping mouth of the X-ray tunnel. Marcus staggered through the metal detector, his eyes locked onto my face, searching desperately for an answer, a clue, a shred of understanding. I just tilted my head, offering him that same sweet, oblivious smile. The game was no longer his. The executioner had arrived. Chloe stepped through the advanced imaging scanner with the exaggerated sigh of a woman profoundly inconvenienced by the rules of ordinary citizens. She patted her perfectly styled hair, retrieved her designer trench coat from the gray plastic bin, and slipped it over her shoulders with a theatrical flourish. She did not look at Marcus. She certainly did not look at me. Her entire focus was fixed on the exit, eager to escape the tedious security checkpoint and head toward her luxurious international flight. Her pristine Gucci rolling bag was next in line. It glided along the stainless steel rollers bumped against the rubber guard and was swallowed by the dark tunnel of the X-ray scanner. I kept my eyes locked on the agent operating the monitor. Just seconds ago, this man had been the picture of bureaucratic apathy, sipping water and staring blankly at the endless parade of neck pillows and toiletry bags. The moment Chloe's designer luggage slid across his screen, his entire demeanor fractured. He stopped chewing his gum. His spine snapped perfectly straight, pressing hard against the back of his ergonomic chair. He leaned so far forward that his nose nearly touched the glass of the monitor. His hand flew across the control panel, typing a rapid sequence of commands to enhance the image, altering the contrast and density settings. Whatever he was seeing, it was massive, anomalous, and terrifyingly dense. He did not hesitate. His hand shot out and slammed down on a large red button mounted on the side of his console. The continuous droning hum of the conveyor belt died instantly. The stainless steel rollers locked into place with a violent mechanical screech that echoed sharply across the terminal. Then the alarms began. It was not a quiet, discreet alert. It was a blaring, high-decibel siren that cut through the ambient airport chatter like a physical weapon. Strobe lights mounted on the ceiling above our specific security lane flashed in rapid, blinding intervals. The mundane routine of the checkpoint completely evaporated, replaced instantly by the rigid, electrified atmosphere of a severe federal threat. Chloe jumped, startled by the sudden noise. She looked up at the flashing lights, her perfectly contoured face twisting into a mask of pure indignation. She crossed her arms tightly across her chest, tapping her designer boot aggressively against the linoleum floor. "This is absolutely ridiculous," Chloe huffed, her voice carrying over the blaring alarm. She glared at the security agent behind the monitor. "Excuse me, turn that noise off. My flight leaves in an hour and you are holding up my bag. I have premier status. This is completely unacceptable." She genuinely believed it was a minor bureaucratic error. She thought a bottle of expensive perfume had leaked, or a hair straightener had triggered a false positive. Her arrogance was so deeply entrenched that the concept of real, unmitigated danger had not even breached her consciousness. She tapped her screen, pulling up her airline application, ready to display her boarding pass and demand to speak to a supervisor. Marcus, however, was experiencing a completely different reality. He stood 3 feet away from her, and he was physically unraveling. When the conveyor belt stopped, his entire body seized. He looked at the X-ray monitor, then at the dark opening of the machine where Chloe's luggage was trapped, and finally he looked back at me. The mathematical equation in his brain finally clicked into place. The impossible variables aligned. The heavy 3-pound brick of synthetic narcotics and the encrypted drive holding 12 million stolen dollars had not vanished into thin air. It had simply changed addresses. I maintained my gentle, unbothered smile, holding his gaze with absolute chilling calm. Marcus looked like a man who had just been shoved out of an airplane without a parachute. His complexion shifted from ashen gray to a sickly, translucent white. He reached up his trembling fingers, clawing desperately at the knot of his silk tie. He yanked it downward, tearing the top button of his expensive dress shirt off in the process. He needed oxygen, but his lungs were entirely locked. He staggered backward, his knees buckling slightly, his polished leather loafers slipping on the slick floor. "Marcus, do something," Chloe snapped, turning to face him. "Tell them who you are. Tell them we are flying first class, and they need to release my luggage right now." Marcus could not speak. His mouth opened and closed in rapid, silent gasps, like a fish pulled from the ocean and thrown onto a burning dock. He clutched his chest right over his heart. His breathing reduced to shallow, ragged wheezes. He knew exactly what was inside that bag, and he knew exactly whose name was attached to it. The life sentence he had meticulously crafted for his wife was now sitting squarely in the lap of his mistress. And because they were traveling together, because he had booked her ticket with his corporate card, the blast radius of this explosion was going to incinerate him right alongside her. "Clear the lane. Clear the immediate area right now." The commanding shout originated from the far end of the checkpoint. The standard agents rapidly backed away, forming a wide perimeter. Heavy, synchronized footsteps pounded against the concrete floor, moving with terrifying speed. A specialized federal tactical unit charged toward the scanner. They were dressed in dark, heavy tactical gear, their faces grim and focused. But it was not just the armed officers that caused the crowd of waiting passengers to gasp and step back. It was the canine unit. The same Belgian Malinois that had alerted to Chloe's bag in the priority queue was back, and this time the animal was absolutely feral. The handler could barely hold the heavy leather leash as the dog surged forward, its claws scrambling for traction on the smooth floor. The dog dragged the officer directly toward the stalled conveyor belt. It did not just sit this time. The dog lunged at the machine, barking with a ferocious, deafening intensity, its front paws scratching frantically at the rubber flaps, trying to get to the Gucci bag trapped inside. Chloe finally stopped tapping her phone. Her indignant posture collapsed as the massive, aggressive animal barked furiously at her possessions. She took a frightened step backward, her eyes widening in genuine alarm. "What is happening?" she stammered, her high-pitched voice cracking. "Why is that dog doing that? Get it away from my things." "Do not move another inch," a tactical officer barked, pointing a stern finger directly at her chest. Marcus was having a full-blown panic attack. His legs finally gave out. He crashed heavily into a stack of empty gray plastic bins, sending them clattering across the checkpoint. He slid down the wall, hitting the floor hard. He pulled his knees up to his chest, wrapping his arms around his head, rocking back and forth. The sophisticated, arrogant corporate executive was reduced to a hyperventilating, terrified child. He was watching his entire universe burn to ash, and he knew there was absolutely no escape. I stood quietly at the edge of the collection zone. My posture relaxed, my hands folded neatly over the handle of my completely clean suitcase. I watched the tactical team swarm Chloe's bag. I watched the dog continue its frantic positive alert. I watched my husband gasp for air on the cold airport floor. The execution was proceeding exactly according to plan, and the explosion was only just beginning. The tactical team secured the perimeter with breathtaking efficiency. Passengers in the adjacent lanes were shoved backward, their complaints silenced by the hard stares of heavily armed federal agents. The air in the terminal felt thick, charged with the heavy electric tension of an active law enforcement operation. The Belgian Malinois was finally pulled back, its handler struggling to control the animal's aggressive lunges toward Chloe's bag. Then the crowd parted. A tall, imposing figure strode through the security lane. He wore the dark uniform of a senior Customs and Border Protection captain. The gold badges on his collar gleamed under the fluorescent lights. His presence commanded absolute, immediate silence. It was a silence born of respect, authority, and undeniable power. It was Carter, my older cousin, a man who had built his career on an unwavering, ironclad foundation of integrity. He was a force of nature within the federal agency, known for dismantling smuggling rings with ruthless precision. He did not play politics. He did not bend rules. He was the kind of officer who would arrest his own mother if she tried to bypass a customs declaration. He walked directly toward the stalled conveyor belt. His dark eyes scanned the scene, taking in the hyperventilating Marcus on the floor, the terrified Chloe shrinking against the metal table, and finally me. Our eyes met. Carter did not smile. He did not offer a comforting wave or a familial greeting. His expression remained entirely stoic, a mask of pure professional authority. But in the microscopic fraction of a second that our gaze held, I saw it. A subtle, almost imperceptible nod. It was a silent acknowledgement, an unspoken confirmation that the board was set, the pieces were in place, and the endgame was officially underway. He broke eye contact and turned his piercing gaze toward Chloe. She recoiled, pressing her back flat against the stainless steel table, her expensive trench coat slipping off her shoulders. "Captain, the transportation security agent," said, his voice trembling slightly. "We have a positive alert from the K9 unit on this bag. Passenger claims ownership." Carter stepped up to the Gucci duffel bag. He did not ask for permission. He grabbed the gold zipper pulls and yanked the main compartment open. He did not bother sifting through the designer clothing. His large hands drove straight into the base of the luggage, feeling the unnatural rigidity along the spine. He found the internal zipper, the one I had closed just 10 minutes prior. He pulled it open. The heavy silver duct-taped package was sitting right there, nestled among the structural ribs of the suitcase. Carter reached in and pulled the 3-pound brick of synthetic narcotics out into the bright terminal light. He held it up, inspecting the meticulous wrapping. He did not look surprised. He looked like a hunter who had just cornered his prey. "Who owns this bag?" Carter demanded, his voice, a deep, resonant baritone that echoed across the silent checkpoint. Chloe's jaw trembled. She looked at the silver package, then at Carter, her eyes wide with unadulterated terror. She raised a shaking finger and pointed directly at Marcus, who was still huddled on the floor, gasping for air. "He is my boss," Chloe stammered, her voice cracking. "He paid for my ticket. He made me carry that bag. I do not know what that is. He packed it." Carter turned slowly, looking down at Marcus. The corporate executive was a pathetic, broken shell of a man. His expensive suit was wrinkled, his tie hung loosely around his neck, and his face was slick with cold sweat. He looked up at Carter, his eyes darting frantically between the imposing federal officer and the silver package of drugs. Sir, Carter said, his tone devoid of any emotion. "Is this your luggage?" Marcus tried to stand, but his legs failed him. He collapsed back against the plastic bins, his hands grasping desperately at his own chest. His mind was actively shattering. The arrogant, calculating embezzler was entirely gone, replaced by a terrified animal trapped in a corner. He looked at Chloe, then at the package, and finally, his panicked gaze snapped to me. I stood there, a picture of calm, unbothered innocence. I offered him a slight, almost imperceptible tilt of my head. It was the physical embodiment of his own favorite phrase. "Your mind is playing tricks on you." Marcus stared at me, his eyes widening in a sudden, horrifying realization. He saw the trap. He saw the cold, calculated precision of my revenge. He realized that his brilliant, foolproof plan to send his wife to a foreign prison had just been reversed with lethal accuracy. The absolute terror of his situation broke his mind completely. The rational corporate facade evaporated, leaving only blind, primal panic. "No," Marcus screamed, his voice raw and hysterical. "No, that is wrong." He scrambled onto his knees, pointing a trembling finger at the silver package in Carter's hand. He lost all sense of self-preservation. The panic overrode his survival instincts. He just wanted the nightmare to stop, and in his desperation, he made the most catastrophic mistake of his life. "That is impossible," Marcus shrieked, his face contorted in absolute terror. "That was supposed to be in my wife's bag." The entire checkpoint froze. The silence that followed was absolute, heavy, and profound. The security agent stared at him in disbelief. Chloe covered her mouth with her hands, her eyes wide with shock. The waiting passengers in the adjacent lanes gasped. Marcus had just confessed. He had just admitted in front of a dozen federal officers and countless witnesses that he had intended to plant 3 pounds of synthetic narcotics in his wife's luggage. He had just handed them the entire case on a silver platter. Carter did not blink. His expression remained incredibly stoic, but I could see the quiet, dangerous satisfaction burning behind his dark eyes. He slowly lowered the silver package, resting it on the metal table. He reached up and tapped the small black body camera mounted on the center of his chest. "Thank you for the confession, sir," Carter said, his voice dropping into a low, terrifying rumble. He gestured to the tactical officer standing behind him. "Hands behind your back. You are both under arrest for international drug trafficking." Two armed officers surged forward. They grabbed Marcus by the arms, hauling him to his feet with rough, unyielding force. They slammed him against the stainless steel table, pulling his hands behind his back. The sharp, metallic click of heavy steel handcuffs ratcheting securely around his wrists was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. Chloe started screaming a high-pitched, hysterical wail as another officer grabbed her arms. She fought against the restraints, kicking and thrashing, begging them to let her go. Marcus did not fight. He went completely limp, his eyes glazed, his spirit entirely broken. He stared at me as they dragged him away, his face a mask of absolute unmitigated horror. I stood quietly by the collection area, my hands folded neatly over the handle of my clean suitcase. I watched them drag my husband and his mistress away in handcuffs. The explosion was complete, and the execution was flawless. The reality of a federal drug bust is not a cinematic event filled with dramatic musical scores or slow-motion heroics. It happens with brutal, suffocating velocity. Carter stood like a statue carved from obsidian, the heavy silver-taped package resting securely on his broad palm. The golden captain badges on his uniform collar caught the harsh fluorescent light of the terminal. He did not break eye contact with Chloe. The young public relations director was pressing herself so hard against the stainless steel inspection table that her knuckles were turning completely white. Chloe looked at the vacuum-sealed brick of narcotics and then down at her pristine designer bag. The mathematical equation finally connected in her brain. She was standing in the middle of an international airport with trafficking quantities of synthetic drugs hidden inside her personal property. She opened her mouth, and a sound completely devoid of human dignity ripped from her throat. It was a shrill, vibrating shriek of pure, unadulterated terror. "I have never seen that before," Chloe sobbed. Her manicured hands shook violently as she pointed a trembling finger directly at Marcus. "He is my boss. He bought my ticket. He insisted on loading the car this morning. He put that in there. I am just a director. He is setting me up. Please, you have to believe me. I do not know what that is." Carter did not flinch. He did not offer her a single ounce of sympathy. He turned his heavy, piercing gaze down to the floor where Marcus was currently suffocating on his own manufactured panic. Marcus was curled against the base of the scanning machine. His expensive tailored suit jacket was covered in the gray dust of the airport floor. He was clutching his chest, pulling in rapid, shallow gulps of air that did nothing to fill his lungs. He looked up at Carter, then at the hysterical Chloe, and finally his bloodshot eyes locked onto me. I stood exactly where I was. My posture was perfectly straight, my hands resting lightly on the telescopic handle of my clean suitcase. I did not offer him a lifeline. I did not scream or cry. I offered him the exact devastating silence he had used against me for the past year. Marcus's mind simply could not process the failure of his own brilliance. He was a powerful tech executive. He was the smartest man in the boardroom. He had orchestrated the perfect corporate embezzlement and the perfect marital execution. The cognitive dissonance of seeing the executioner's blade swinging rapidly toward his own neck shattered his psychological framework entirely. The rational, calculating executive died on that linoleum floor, leaving behind a terrified, cornered animal. The desperation overrode every survival instinct he possessed. He scrambled forward onto his hands and knees, completely ignoring the federal tactical officers who instantly placed their hands on their holstered weapons at his sudden, erratic movement. He pointed a shaking, sweaty finger at the silver brick resting in Carter's hand. "That is impossible," Marcus screamed. His voice cracked into a pathetic, high-pitched wail that echoed across the vaulted ceilings of the terminal. "That is not supposed to be there. That was supposed to be in my wife's bag. The entire security checkpoint plunged into a silence so profound it felt like a vacuum. The murmuring passengers, the rattling plastic bins, the ambient terminal announcements all instantly evaporated. Every single person in the vicinity turned to stare at the man on the floor. Chloe stopped crying. Her jaw dropped open as she stared at the man she had been sleeping with. She realized in that exact horrifying second that he had never planned to protect her. He had planned to use her as a decoy if his operation went south. The romance, the luxury hotel, stays the expensive jewelry. It was all a down payment for her role as his collateral damage. Carter slowly lowered the package onto the metal inspection table. His face was a mask of cold, unyielding federal authority. He reached up with a steady hand and firmly tapped the small square body camera mounted to the center of his tactical vest. A tiny red light blinked steadily, confirming it was actively recording every single word spoken in the lane. "Thank you for the confession, sir," Carter said. His deep voice resonated with absolute terrifying finality. "Hands behind your back." The command broke the spell. The tactical officers descended on Marcus like wolves. They grabbed him by the shoulders, hauling him off the floor with zero regard for his expensive tailoring. They slammed him chest first against the stainless steel inspection table right next to the package of narcotics. The sharp metallic click of heavy steel handcuffs ratcheting securely around his wrists was the most beautiful symphony I had ever heard. Two female customs officers stepped forward, securing Chloe's arms behind her back. She did not fight them. She just stood there openly weeping, her mascara running in dark, jagged streams down her pale cheeks. The pristine designer luggage she had been so incredibly proud of was now being tagged and bagged as federal evidence. Carter stepped directly in front of Marcus. He leaned down slightly, ensuring his voice was captured perfectly by the microphone on his vest. "You have the right to remain silent." Carter began reciting the Miranda warning with chilling precision. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be provided for you." Marcus was hyperventilating, his cheek pressed hard against the cold metal table. He twisted his neck, straining against the iron grip of the tactical officers, searching frantically for me through the crowd of uniforms. "Elena," he begged, tears mixed with the heavy sweat pouring down his face. "Elena, tell them. Tell them I am innocent. Please, you have to help me. Tell them this is a mistake." I took a slow, deliberate step forward. I stopped just outside the perimeter established by the tactical team. I looked down at the man who had spent months trying to convince me I was losing my mind. The man who had stolen $12 million and planned to let me rot in a foreign prison while he drank champagne on a tropical island. I leaned forward slightly, dropping my voice to a sharp whisper that only he and Carter could hear. "Your mind is playing tricks on you, Marcus," I said softly, my eyes locking onto his terrified gaze. The color drained from his face entirely. His eyes rolled back slightly, the absolute horror of his reality finally crushing his spirit. Carter signaled to the officers. They hoisted Marcus up and began marching him through the terminal. The crowd of delayed passengers parted like the Red Sea. Hundreds of people held up their smartphones, recording the wealthy, arrogant executive being dragged away in absolute disgrace. Chloe followed behind him, her head bowed in profound shame. The flashing red and blue strobes from the checkpoint illuminated the concourse, casting long, erratic shadows against the walls. The sound of their shuffling footsteps faded into the distance, drowned out by the urgent whispers of the surrounding crowd uploading their videos to social media. A profound sense of lightness washed over my shoulders. The heavy, suffocating anxiety I had carried for months evaporated into the sterile airport air. My husband had built a cage designed to hold me forever, but he had walked inside and handed me the key. I picked up my leather tote bag, adjusted my coat, and prepared for the final phase of his destruction. The stark, windowless interrogation room deep within the bowels of John F. Kennedy Airport was a masterclass in psychological pressure. Fluorescent lights buzzed mercilessly overhead, casting long, harsh shadows across the scratched metal table bolted to the floor. The air was frigid, smelling faintly of industrial cleaner and stale coffee. Inside this concrete box, The grand romance between the arrogant chief operating officer and his ambitious public relations director completely disintegrated. The illusion of their glamorous future shattered against the brutal reality of federal drug trafficking charges. Chloe was a mess of smeared mascara and tear-stained silk. Her designer trench coat lay crumpled on a plastic chair. She paced the small room like a caged animal, her voice shrill and desperate as she pointed a shaking finger at Marcus. He set me up. He told me to pack that bag. I did not know what was in it. He is trying to ruin my life. Marcus sat slouched in a metal chair, his expensive suit disheveled, his tie hanging loosely around his neck. The confident, calculating executive was gone. In his place was a pathetic, terrified man, desperately trying to save himself. She is lying. She is a mule. I did not know anything about those drugs. She is trying to pin this on me. The accusations flew back and forth, a pathetic, ugly display of self-preservation. The partnership built on stolen money and deceit dissolved into mutual betrayal the moment the stakes became real. They were turning on each other, tearing each other apart, completely oblivious to the fact that they were both already doomed. Carter stood silently by the heavy steel door, his arms crossed over his chest, his expression an unreadable mask of federal authority. He watched the spectacle with the detached observation of a seasoned officer accustomed to seeing the worst of human nature. He did not intervene. He just let them dig their graves deeper with every panicked accusation. Then the heavy metal door clicked open. The bickering stopped instantly. Both Marcus and Chloe snapped their heads toward the sound, their eyes wide with a desperate, pathetic hope that their lawyer had arrived. Instead, I walked in. I was not wearing handcuffs. I was not escorted by tactical officers. I walked in accompanied by my powerhouse corporate attorney, a woman named Victoria, whose reputation for dismantling corrupt tech executives preceded her. My posture was perfectly straight, my expression an impenetrable mask of calm, cold resolve. Marcus's jaw dropped, the desperate hope in his eyes vanished, replaced by a profound, sickening realization. He saw me standing there, free, untouchable, and flanked by legal representation. He finally understood that the trap had not just sprung on Chloe. It had sprung on both of them, and I was the one holding the remote detonator. Elena, Marcus whispered, his voice trembling, barely audible over the hum of the fluorescent lights. "What are you doing here?" I did not answer him. I did not scream or cry or hurl accusations. I simply walked over to the metal table, pulled out the chair opposite him, and sat down. Victoria stood silently behind me, a formidable presence projecting absolute legal authority. I placed a thick, pristine, color-coded audit portfolio onto the scratched metal surface. The sound it made was soft, yet it resonated in the small room with the finality of a gavel striking a block. Marcus stared at the portfolio, his eyes darting between the document and my face. The last vestige of his arrogant facade crumbled, leaving nothing but sheer, unadulterated terror. He knew what was in that portfolio. He knew exactly what I held in my hands, and he knew with terrifying certainty that his life as he knew it was officially over. Marcus stared at the portfolio. The pristine, color-coded tabs seemed to mock the absolute chaos of his current reality. He reached out a trembling hand, his fingers hovering over the heavy cardstock cover, terrified to actually touch it. He looked up at me, his eyes wide and bloodshot, searching for any sign of mercy. He found none. I did not yell. I did not need to. I leaned forward, resting my hands flat on the cold metal table, and delivered the execution order with chilling, measured precision. "You really thought my mind was just playing tricks on me, did you not, Marcus?" I said, my voice barely above a whisper, yet it echoed off the concrete walls. "You spent months trying to convince me I was crazy. You isolated me. You made me question my own memory. You thought you had broken me down into a compliant, paranoid shell." I paused, letting the silence stretch, letting the weight of my words press down on his chest. "But you made one fatal mistake," I continued. "You forgot who you married. You forgot that I dismantle digital lies for a living." I reached out and slowly flipped open the portfolio. The first page displayed a massive, complex flowchart. It traced the origin of the $12 million, detailing the phantom hardware invoices, the offshore servers, and the cryptocurrency wire transfers. It was a masterpiece of cybersecurity forensics, a meticulously documented roadmap of his corporate treason. Marcus's breath hitched. He stared at the flowchart, his eyes tracing the red lines connecting his supposedly hidden crypto accounts. The blood drained from his face completely. He looked as though he might physically collapse. "I found the biometric drive, Marcus," I said, my voice dropping to a terrifying, absolute calm. "The one you tried to bury, beneath 3 pounds of synthetic narcotics in my suitcase. The one you thought would guarantee me an execution in a Singaporean prison." Chloe gasped from the corner of the room, her hands flying to her mouth. She had not known about the embezzlement. She had not known the true scale of the monster she had been sleeping with. "I bypassed your military-grade encryption in 7 minutes," I stated, leaning back in my chair. "I copied every single byte of data, the seed phrases for your cold wallets, the fabricated emails designed to frame me, and of course the master ledger of your $12 million hardware heist." Marcus let out a choked, desperate sound. He grabbed the edges of the table, his knuckles turning white. "Elena, please," he begged, his voice cracking. "We can fix this. We can make a deal. I will give you everything. The house, the accounts, whatever you want. Just do not give them the drive." I offered him a small, cold smile. "Your mind is playing tricks on you, Marcus," I said, throwing his favorite gaslighting phrase right back in his face. I checked my watch. It is currently 10:45 in the morning. At exactly 6 in the morning, while you were busy loading my suitcase into the SUV, I initiated a secure automated data transfer. I paused, ensuring he caught every single word. "I sent the complete unredacted contents of your solid-state drive directly to the New York field office of the FBI. I sent a copy to the Enforcement Division of the SEC. And just for good measure, I sent the entire portfolio to the personal email address of your CEO." Marcus's eyes rolled back slightly. He slumped forward, his forehead hitting the metal table with a dull thud. A low, agonizing groan escaped his lips. "You are not just going down for international drug trafficking, Marcus," I concluded, standing up and smoothing the wrinkles from my trousers. "You are going down for massive federal corporate fraud. Your robotics company is already freezing your assets. The FBI is likely raiding your office right now. You are going to spend the next 20 years in a federal penitentiary." I turned away from the table and walked toward the heavy steel door. I did not look back at Chloe, who was now weeping openly, realizing her life was truly and utterly destroyed. I did not look back at Marcus, who was sobbing against the cold metal, a broken, pathetic shell of the arrogant man he once was. Carter opened the door for me, his expression remaining perfectly stoic, but I caught the slight respectful nod he offered as I passed. I stepped out of the interrogation room and into the bright, bustling hallway of the airport. The air felt incredibly light. The heavy, suffocating anxiety I had carried for months had evaporated entirely. The execution was complete. The monster was caged. I walked toward the exit, my head held high, ready to step into a future that finally belonged entirely to me. The overarching narrative woven through these profound experiences highlights one of the most painful yet ultimately liberating lessons a person can learn. Your inherent self-worth is never dictated by those who refuse to see it, even if those people are your own partners or family. For years, the protagonists in these situations sought validation from manipulators, who continually offered nothing but conditional love, exclusion, and psychological warfare, whether it was being isolated in your own home, abandoned in a time of severe grief, or mocked for pursuing an independent path. The heartbreak was always rooted in the desperate hope that loyalty would eventually guarantee basic respect. However, the true turning point in each story arrives when that hope is finally relinquished. The lesson here is that establishing firm boundaries and walking away from a toxic environment is not an act of cruelty or revenge. It is an essential act of self-preservation. When you stop fighting to be valued by people committed to misunderstanding you, you reclaim your own power. You realize that you cannot control how others treat you, but you possess absolute control over what you are willing to accept. By stepping away from the cycle of emotional abuse and conditional approval, we open the door to build our own chosen reality. We learn that genuine love is defined by those who show up during our darkest moments and celebrate our victories without an underlying agenda. True success is not about forcing toxic people to respect you. It is about building a life so authentically fulfilling that their opinions no longer matter. If you are currently exhausting yourself trying to earn the love of people who continually diminish you, take a step back today and choose to invest that energy into building your own boundaries instead.